Hey everyone, thanks so kindly for joining us. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple, and tonight I am very glad to welcome Craig Rosebraugh for a discussion of his book, Burning Rage of a Dying Planet, the FBI versus the Earth Liberation Front. Welcome, Craig. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for being here in person and also online. Hello, online audience. I'm waving to a camera if you can't tell. We have some people joining us online, and if you are joining us online, let us know where you're tuning in from. That's always a fun thing. We like to hear from you. We are here in San Francisco. We're broadcasting from San Francisco, California. We open each of our events with a land acknowledgement. We are operating on unceded Ramaytush land, and we think that acknowledgement requires action, and so we encourage you to donate either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization each time you hear a land acknowledgement. At our back desk, and I'll link in the chat as well, we have information about the Ramaytush Land Trust, which is our preferred direction of pointing people to learn about how to participate in this project of recreation. I have very brief business before I let Craig take over. Now's a good time to silence your phones if you have not already. Please do check out our full event calendar at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event that you are currently attending. The restroom is behind me. It's available after the event and not during the event for obvious reasons. If you need to know how to get there, I'll gladly help you. We have copies of Craig's book at the front register. You can find them there. If you've been here before, you've certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you support the writers who put so much work into making these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you're able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our author for this evening. First, Craig Rosebraugh is an author, producer, attorney, and has been a recognized environmental and political activist for over 2 decades, having led numerous local and national campaigns. Originally from Portland, Oregon, Craig served as a spokesperson for the Earth Liberation Front, a radical environmental group that targeted industry with large-scale arson attacks during the 1990s and 2000s. He's been featured in 60 Minutes, 2020, and other programs, as well as in Rolling Stone, The New York Times, National Geographic, and elsewhere. Craig resides with his family in Los Angeles, and this edition of Burning Rage of a Dying Planet is the reason we're here tonight. Let's give one hand for Craig Rosebraugh.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Just a bit of background, and thank you very much for hosting me tonight. I greatly appreciate it. It's great to be here at Green Apple and see the bookstore and support the great community. Just a bit of background on the book. This is the second edition of the book. The first book was published in 2004. And the reason that I decided now to publish a second edition will lead me into the segment that I'm going to read tonight from my reading. It's actually an untold story that is why I actually wrote the book in the first place. And this is a very interesting story that kind of fits with the title, the FBI versus the Earth Liberation Front. So a bit of background on the ELF. The group emerged in the mid-1990s as out of frustration from individuals who had gone through multiple avenues trying to create change, whether it be the ballot box, whether it be holding marches, rallies, more grassroots type of activities. And people became frustrated that they didn't see that their methods were working. They didn't see results that they had intended and results that were lasting. So at that particular time in 1996, certain individuals decided to hit corporations where it would matter the most in their pocketbook and to send a financial statement to them that they were no longer going to put up with corporations damaging the environment for monetary gain. And so myself, how I come into this story is I received the first communication, the anonymous communication that was sent to me by the ELF in 1997 that was claiming responsibility for their first action. And I had to make that decision whether or not I was going to put that communication out to the media and explain to the media why this action went on, that these weren't just a group of random, individuals intent on creating lawlessness. They had a clear political and social motive. Or was I just going to ignore it, throw it away, and go on with my life as an activist? And I felt as long as no one was injured, I was going to release this information to the media, having no idea that this group would continue. I had no idea there would be more messages that would come. This could have been a one-off ad hoc group that committed one arson attack and then went off on their way, and I would never hear from them again. I chose to put out that communication to the media, and as a result, became a de facto spokesperson for the ELF, the Earth Liberation Front, from 1997 through 2001, 5 years of a very fierce campaign that targeted various industries around the United States, from the Northwest to huge fire at Vail ski resorts in 1998, to an arson attack at Michigan State University on New Year's Eve, 1999, all the way out to Long Island, targeting new construction out there. And as a result of the FBI's inability to capture and prosecute any members of the ELF for the better part of a decade, most of the FBI's pressure and tactics were applied toward me, the spokesperson. And so that's where you get, in this book, that's where you get the FBI versus the Earth Liberation Front. It's not only a memoir of my time speaking out for the Earth Liberation Front, but it's also an examination of the tactics and strategies that the FBI went to and applied in trying to stop this movement from continuing to grow. So with that, I've prepared a segment that I'm going to read for you, and it goes again toward the story of why the book was written in the first place, that was only revealed to me in terms of the whole story in the last few years. Early in 2001, I was approached over email by a man named Robert Erringer. The message was quite polite, contained just the right amount of flattery, and seemed like just another one of the many emails I would receive either praising or condemning me and the ELF or ALF. ALF refers to the Animal Liberation Front, the ELF refers to the Earth Liberation Front. However, upon closer read, what seemed to set this one apart from others was that Erringer wrote that he was a book packager and had recently seen me speak. He believed that my story would make a fascinating and very marketable book, and he wanted to know if I was interested in discussing this potential with him. Now, by this time, I was admittedly fucking paranoid. Not only had I been arrested a dozen times by police, but I had been subpoenaed to multiple federal grand jury investigations, had my home and office raided twice, my arm broken by the cops, experienced mysterious break-ins at my homes, been followed around the city and across the country by the FBI, been ripped out of a vehicle by the FBI and made to lay face down at gunpoint on a busy street in Florida. I also knew the feds were monitoring my phones, emails, and physical mail. And if that wasn't enough, I also had been receiving frequent and serious death threats. So yeah, I was extremely paranoid and I didn't trust anyone. My initial response to Erringer was to thank him for his email and decline his offer. I wasn't interested in writing a book about the ELF or my experiences at that time. In truth, I couldn't imagine how, with my incredibly busy schedule, I could carve out the better part of a year it could take to pen such a work. I also figured that if I was ever interested in writing such a book, I could do so on my own terms without the involvement of someone I didn't necessarily know and trust. But Erringer persisted. Having removed myself as a media mouthpiece for the eco-saboteurs on September 6th, I finally began speaking to Erringer in late November and early December 2001. Attempting to vet him as much as I was able to at the time, I asked Ehringer for more information about himself. I figured since he was claiming to be a book packager with connections to major publishing houses, he would have previous book projects in which he was credited. Ehringer complied with my request and sent some reviews of titles he had helped package, as well as others he had written himself. By December of that year, I had agreed to meet with Ehringer on January 7, 2002, to hear more about him and his proposal. That night, I met with Ehringer in Portland, and while I was skeptical as hell of this guy, I listened to him compliment me and discuss his background and the potential of a book project. After hearing him discuss the numerous benefits a book might have in getting the message of the ELF and the ALF out to a wider audience, I began to take more of an interest. I went away from the meeting telling Ehringer I was about to head to the East Coast, where I was conducting a series of lectures on the ELF, and where I also had been subpoenaed to testify before a U.S. congressional subcommittee investigating, quote, eco-terrorism. But I also agreed to create an outline of a proposed book for Ehringer to review to see if we could move forward with the project. After the hearing in Washington, D.C. concluded and I breathed a sigh of relief, I was not imprisoned for my non-cooperation with the subcommittee. I spent some time creating an outline for the memoir of my time speaking for the ELF and the ALF. I did hope that the project, if it moved forward, would provide more of an opportunity to explain the rationale of the ELF strategy and tactics, as well as provide a greater understanding of the environmental crimes of some of the entities targeted by the group. I say more of an opportunity, as in the overwhelming majority of mainstream news stories about the ELF and its actions, in most of those, I would be afforded typically a quick soundbite, while the bulk of the stories would be focused on demonizing the group under the cliche terrorist labeling. After creating a chapter outline and drafting a sample chapter of the book, I sent them to an overly eager Ehringer, who quickly responded with praise and excitement. His next move was to invite me down for an all-expense-paid meeting that he would host in Santa Barbara, California. In attendance would not only be me and Ehringer, but a man by the name of Frank Martin, who Ehringer told me was his editor colleague that lived in Chicago. While I remained open about the idea of the book, I was skeptical of Ehringer and now this Frank Martin. As a result, I convinced my sister Carrie, who was living in Los Angeles at the time, to join me for the weekend in Santa Barbara. I hoped, if nothing else, she would be able to provide added observation and feedback about Ehringer and Martin to help me decide if I should run for the hills. So I drove down to Los Angeles, picked Carrie up, and we headed to Santa Barbara, checking into the hotel suite Ehringer had reserved. That night and throughout the weekend, Ehringer and Martin met with Carrie and I, wining and dining us and sparing no expense. For most of that time, I sat back and said very little out of skepticism while Carrie tried to get to know Ehringer and Martin better to see what information we could learn about him. Ehringer seemed to take a particular liking to Carrie, and by the end of our time together was sharing $100 plus bottles of wine with her and alluding to connections that might advance her art career. At the end of the weekend, Carrie and I headed off, unsure of these characters, but feeling confident they likely meant no harm. And while I made the trek back to Portland, Ehringer and Martin were going to discuss moving forward and making me an offer. Sure enough, within a couple of weeks, Ehringer sent a message wanting to proceed with the project. The plan was that I was to work closely with Martin, where I would draft 3 chapters at a time, and upon his review and acceptance, I would receive an installment of $1,000 and proceed to the next set of chapters. As the process began, Ehringer told me he was moving to London and that while he would still be in the loop on the project, Martin would be taking the lead and working with me on a regular basis. This working process would continue for the next 9 months. Every 3 or 4 chapters that I would complete would be reviewed by Martin, and then I would be paid my next advanced installment before continuing. Sometimes these installments would be sent via email, and other times hand-delivered by Martin. Via mail. On one hand, I met Martin at a hotel room in downtown Portland where we worked for a couple of hours reviewing a set of chapters I had written. For the most part, everything seemed fine with the working relationship. The only oddity came with increased pressure from Martin and Ehringer, not only to finish the book, but to ensure I included much more detailed information about the ELF itself. And then there was a time Martin visited me for a meeting at my home in Portland. It was September 2002, and I had just completed another few chapters of the book, which brought me up to being about 3/4 done with the first draft of the manuscript. As we had agreed, Martin arrived in Portland, and after checking into his hotel, proceeded to make his way to my house. Answering the door, I could see Martin was his usual charismatic self, eager to see me and continue moving forward with the project. This time, however, he had brought me a gift. In his hand was an FBI baseball cap that Martin said he picked up at the airport, thinking it would make a comical present for me. I took the hat, thinking the joke was a bit bizarre, but paid it little attention. Yet months and even years later, this gift would take on a new meaning. Just going to get a drink of water. Clipping. On December 10th, 2002, I finally finished the last set of chapters and sent the completed first draft of the manuscript to both Erringer and Martin. I was extremely relieved, as it had been a lengthy process, and I believe, since each set of chapters had, upon completion, been approved by Martin and Erringer, that my main task moving forward would be some minor editing. However, this proved to be wrong. Initially, though, that was the impression I got from Martin. He wanted to schedule an in-person meeting for January 5th and 6th, 2003, to review the manuscript with me and proceed with minor editing. Yet, as December wore on, Martin informed me that both he and Erringer were not happy with the manuscript and that it needed a significant amount of work. I was told the meetings then scheduled for the first week of January would involve creating a plan to basically start from scratch with an entire rewrite of the manuscript. What I was told was missing was more in-depth information about the ELF and who the members really were. I found this troubling and extremely frustrating, as I had let Erringer and Martin know from day one that I did not have this information, and if I did, I would certainly not include it in the book. And now, after working on this book for nearly a year, I would have to rewrite the entire manuscript. Moving forward and preparing for the January 5th and 6th meetings with Martin, I was feeling pretty down about the project, but part of me still trusted that perhaps their assessment of the manuscript was correct. Maybe it did need a significant rewrite. I took a deep breath and promised myself I would see the project through. That was on Saturday, January 3rd. By Sunday, I was a basket case again, skeptical and unsure of why, after a year of writing chapters that were already approved, I would have to go back and do a complete rewrite. Why did there appear to be no interest in the book from the many publishers Erringer had allegedly contacted? These questions haunted me. As the night approached, I found my anxiety refused to allow me to sleep. Martin would be knocking on my door early the next morning, and I felt a heightened panic set in. I parked myself in front of my computer and began searching the internet for any information I hadn't previously seen on Erringer and Martin. In a fatigued-ridden, sleepless daze, I pored over page after page, searching for something, anything that would prove my paranoia was well-founded. At first, I saw the same listings of book titles Erringer had worked on and a few about Martin here and there. And then, after perusing a series of additional pages, I found a listing that made my heart race, made my breath vanish, and sent me off to gather every weapon I had in my house. So that's just a brief introduction to the story of how the book was written. So other than that, it's a complete memoir of my time speaking out for the group, all the way through the FBI takedown, of how the FBI was finally able to catch and prosecute the main 18 members initially of the group in the Northwest, and eventually the Long Island group, the Midwest group, and there's still one individual in prison today, Marius Mason, on a 22-and-a-half-year sentence. So, are there any questions? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
How many years was the person how many more years did the person have? He was in jail.
I believe he has 3 to 4 years right now.
Okay.
But good question. Anybody else? Yes, in the back.
Yes. Can you tell us what happened in that cliffhanger, or is that we need to buy the book?
Oh no, that's the spoiler. You've got to like dig into that book and figure it out.
All right.
Yes, sir.
So it must have been interesting to dig in to this era and reflect a lot on your experiences. So now that you've reflected this amount, if I could put you in a time capsule back to 2001 or even 1997, what would you have done differently?
So the question is, what would I have done differently if I had to do it all over again? It's a great question. It's something I have thought about. I think one thing, and it kind of goes, I've been asked the question, do you have any regrets about that whole time period, about what I was involved with, or in my role of what I did? And one of the regrets I have is that I spoke in that selected reading about the paranoia that comes from the FBI raids on my house, just the constant investigation that goes on for years, where you really feel like you can't trust anybody, and you kind of feel like you're going crazy because so much is going on. And you walk by people in a grocery store or down the street, and you feel like they have no idea of what is going on to you, that they're living what seems to be a regular life, and you're living some sort of crime drama TV movie show, type situation. So that paranoia got so bad that I was very exclusionary. I had my inner circle, which was very, very small, of friends, and anybody else that tried to get close to me, I really pushed them away because of the FBI was sending. We know now from getting my FBI file, which was like 22,000 pages that I received in the last 5 years, that they would send even to presentations like this. When I would go around the country and discuss the ELF, they would have people specifically in the audience and try to come up and befriend me afterwards to try to make those connections and get in what they thought was the inner circle of the ELF so they could crack the case. So one of my regrets, or something I would do different, is try to, in those very difficult circumstances, be more open to people and not shut people out that are really trying to help, or get to be more involved and be more supportive. That's a big one. Yeah.
When you were within that year of writing the original book, what was your mindset like in terms of what did you want to get across to readers? Why did you have a reason for yourself, besides the publisher's goal, to write that?
It's a good question. Why did I want to write it in the first place? What goals did I have for it? And the entire time I represented the Earth Liberation Front and for a while the Animal Liberation Front, because the activism or the work that those, the ELF was involved in particular, was very controversial. It involved very large-scale arson attacks, because that is considered violence by so many people. The media, mainstream media in particular, was never fair. I didn't ever expect that they would or desire them to support the activity, but I wanted fair journalism to actually be able to, you can call it what you want to, but at least tell the other side, what was that corporation guilty of? Why were they targeted in the first place? And most of the time they never would. They would say allegedly and give a one line at the most, but in a giant article condemning, the eco-terrorists, the violent people that need to be captured. And that was a big part of why I wanted to write the book, was to give more information, because that was the role that I took on as a spokesperson, is I would research heavily what were timber corporations like Boise Cascade doing that warranted their offices being burned down. what were certain genetic engineering researchers doing, like Catherine Ives at Michigan State University, that warranted, these individuals being so upset about it. They went in and burned their entire, office to the ground, causing $1 million in damage at MSU. So I wanted that information at least to get out so that readers could have a more thorough understanding that these guys weren't just clueless, uneducated arsonists, that they're activists. They, in their heart, they wanted a better world. They just couldn't figure out another way to get there at that time. They had gone through everything that were taught, as means, as strategies and tactics to change things if we see a problem in society. We're dictated that there are certain rules we have to follow, and they followed all of those, and there was no change. And so the question that begs to be asked, and that they ask themselves, is what do we do? Do we continue to involve ourselves in ineffective activities that don't change anything? And if by doing so we end up in a form of insanity, chasing our tail around in a circle, or do we look for something else that is outside of that paradigm, outside of those rules? And that's what they did at that particular time. Like it or not, that's what they did. Any other questions? Yes.
Is there anything in the years following your time with the ELF and watching other groups, radical or not, be targeted by the FBI, where you've been like, yes, that looks familiar to me, or you've been like, oh, they actually have changed their tactics, or they're doing so. I hate to say like, oh, they're being more fair, or like, have you seen any change in like how the FBI deals with people who, I'm thinking of like Black Lives Matter in particular, like what they do, how they target people, are they more lenient, are they not? Have you seen any change, basically?
It's a good question. Have I seen any change in the FBI's tactics and strategies to deal with social and political movements since the time of the ELF? I would say no, whatsoever. Years ago, the FBI had a policy called COINTELPRO, which was counterintelligence program, that was well documented. You probably have books here at the bookstore on it. Ward Churchill wrote about it extensively. A number of other authors have. But it was a campaign that targeted like the Black Panther movement, the American Indian movement, civil rights organizations, Puerto Rican independence movement, and they used very dirty, underhanded tactics that should not be legal and probably weren't legal at that time. And the only reason that they were discovered is that basically there were documents that were obtained that showed they were doing this. And because there was publicity to it, they got in front of it and said, oh, okay, we're going to stop this. We're going to not engage in these kind of tactics anymore. And of course they still do it. They never stop. They just don't talk about it, and they call it something different. But the tactics are still very, very the same, if not worse. I mean, I think the realization is any movement, any social or political movement that actually takes the step that threatens commerce or the status quo will be met with a certain amount of resistance to stop that. As the more the threat rises and becomes more severe, the greater the resistance and the greater the severe tactics from the FBI. And that's always been the case, and it hasn't changed. Any other questions? Oh, anything from the online crew?
Just some clap emojis,
Oh.
and a thank you, Craig, from somebody, Mark.
Oh, that's good. All right, well, if there's nothing else, thank you all for coming out. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks, Craig.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.